Welcome to A Game of Ice and Fire, a video series devoted to a Song of Ice and Fire wargame by Cool Mini or Not. We cover all aspects of the hobby with tactics and list build videos, painting tutorials at varying levels, and battle reports. Before we get into this painting tutorial, I just want to take a couple minutes of your time to let you know that Big Top Gaming recently launched a Patreon page. Now, I am only utilizing this to further support the growth of the channel with the audio equipment, visual equipment, paying for podcast access or hosting fees, I guess. And there's a couple different levels for the Patreon. It's only pulling on a monthly basis since I didn't want to pull every time I put out some piece of material for you, because that can be up to 5 times a week, and that's not a world I want to put anyone in. There's also no exclusive content hidden behind the Patreon wall. Everything that I put out is going to be available to the public all at the same time. Some of the things that are behind Patreon are there will be a monthly voting session for battle reports. There will also be quarterly benefits for submitting lists that get played on the channel, and painting tutorials as well. Really, I want to utilize this to move the channel when I don't quite have the means to move it along as quickly as some other people might want. So if you want to go out there and support me on Patreon, feel free. You have that platform now, but by no means am I expecting this out of anyone. I'm still going to be putting all this content out because it still brings me a lot of happiness, a lot of joy to be able to share my hobby with the world. And I'm not going to, like I said, not going to hide anything behind it. It's just a platform for support for those who might want to get into it. So I'm leaving a link to the Patreon in the description on this video, but now I think I've spent enough time on this so we can go into painting these Sworn Brothers. So the thing about Night's Watch that's difficult to do is painting the color black, which is really the central point of this entire tutorial. If you want to follow kind of the books, or you really want to get into like the fluff of it and make sure that all your stuff is painted the way it's supposed to be, I believe in the stories or the books, the Night's Watch, if you're from like more of a noble house or you've got money, your family has money, you do show up to Castle Black with all your black stuff on. Like, that's just how the family preps you to go north and take the black. If you're from a lesser house or of a destitute background, maybe even a criminal, right? They just have whatever you wear when you show up, and they dye it black. So there's a couple things we're going to be doing with this Sworn Brother in particular that's probably going to lean more towards the side of showing up with black clothing. So we've got maybe 3 or 4 different variations that we're going to go over here. So we've painted the model black, and you could stop here if you wanted to, but we're not. So I'm using, the thing about black that's tough is that some people just will mix a little bit of white in their black and get that grayish highlight, but it's really stark and drab. So what I'm using here is starting off with the cool gray, or just the cool gray, and I'm using Vallejo Game Colors Wolf Gray here. And with black, you kind of have an easier time doing this, it's like cheaty wet blending, where in order to get your blends a little bit more smooth and easy, you can take the 2 colors that you're trying to blend with and mix them together. So I can put down black first on the model, and then if I want to get up to this cool gray color, I can then take the wolf gray and then mix it with the black. And then what I'm doing here is just taking some of the raised edges, especially on the folds of the cloth here. I think we're working on the tunic right now. And I first laid down a line of where I want the initial highlight to be, and then I take my brush and then I just kind of I leave a lot of or take a lot of the paint off. I kind of have like a paper towel that's next to me, but it's a little damp, so I can sponge off some of the paint that's on there and then go through with the brush that's mostly clean right now. And then if I drag it between where the new gray is and the old black was, those colors are still wet enough, or the paint's still wet enough, to where I can try and mix those colors together in a couple strokes. Now, you're not going back and forth like painting a fence. You're really just doing nice smooth strokes in one motion to try and get that blend to happen, and you can kind of see it play out as you keep going. And so once you swipe once, you wipe your brush off, see if you like what you've got, do it again, and you keep doing that as long as the paint allows until you've kind of got this nice smooth transition. And as you're doing it, you can kind of pull off on the brush a little bit so less bristles will hit the blended area in between, so that that blend gets a little bit tighter and smoother as you start to establish it. So then once that's finished, hopefully your paint's still wet enough to where you can go back with a little bit more of the straight cool gray color and just use a little bit. You can try and edge highlight if you want to, or you can go back in and try and blend that into the previous color. But for me, in order to get this to work the way that I want it to, my paints are usually a little bit thicker than what people would normally feel comfortable working with. I'm not saying that these are straight out of the bottle, but I would say maybe like a paint to water ratio of 2 to 1. So it's still pretty workable, and you're not going to get a lot of spread out of the paint as you put it down. So as we go through the rest of this model, I'm doing a few different things to not some, like, I still will say cheat the blends, because it's not like I'm really blending here. I'm just using all my blending is kind of happening off of the model. It's more so on the palette. Some of it's on the model, of course, but I think the point that we've worked to now, I am putting down the different mixes of that gray and black until they kind of work for me. And especially in these darker parts, that blend isn't going to be as important, because these are the parts that I've dictated aren't going to be catching a lot of light. So we can kind of make those look a little less accurate. You know what I'm saying? So underneath the arm here, we're just picking out some of the folds in the tunic that he's got on. We're really going to keep this whole tunic color that gray black. Now, the reason why I'm kind of alternating the different colors of black on this is that it can kind of, with the Night's Watch, you kind of get a really sameness type look with them. You kind of pick one black and, go with it. But here I'm going to try, instead of building up contrast with colors, because it's not, I don't really have that luxury the way that I want to paint the Night's Watch. I want to keep them very, I want to keep it black. There's not going to be any cream colored fur or super tan colored fur or any brown leather on these models. They're taking the black and they're super dark black. Like that's what I'm going for here. So in order to try and get that visual interest on the model, we're really going to be pushing hard on trying to change the way some of these blacks are working. So we can see as I get more towards the top of the model with the arms, I'm putting in almost straight wolf gray so that I can get a lot of light, make it look like a lot of light is bouncing off of those arms as he's got the sword held up above his head. And we're still not neglecting any of the folds in the robe. I think whenever you hit on cloth a fold on the model, you should probably highlight it. There's not many points where you wouldn't want to highlight a fold in the robe unless it's completely underneath them and won't make any sense. But even then, I think there might be just a little bit of a catch of a highlight. So I do apologize for all of the shaking on these. My paint station is kind of my recording station and where I mount all of the arms for my microphones and camera. So for the time being, it's kind of what I'm working with here as I'm trying to upgrade my recording station. So this is the back part of the tunic, and here I've got a lot more solid sweeps. So you can see I'm throwing down a huge line of that that gray, and this is where you can really pick out some of the blending that I'm doing. You can kind of see as I'm working in some of the black into that wolf gray, I'm still able to kind of sweep off some of the brush before I take it to that paper towel. And now I've kind of worked that blend in together, and then I clean up the bottom side of the highlight with that straight black. So now I've got a huge separation between where that highlight is and then where the shadows start on the next fold. And here I'm starting to rake in that black back into the wolf gray. And at certain points here, I've just got to try and reestablish the highlight or the shadow line because it gets lost in some of the working of the brush back and forth. And this process is not something that's, I try to do it quick and dirty, but it can take some time to get this right. You might find yourself going back and forth over a couple times. The biggest thing to pay attention to when you're looking at that is make sure that your paint's dry before you move on to something else, because you can peel off a dried layer. So now we're going to be going towards the more French gray side, and here I'm using Vallejo Game Color Khaki, and that's just more of a creamy brown. It's not so much bone color, but it really is khaki. Like, you put some cargo shorts on and that's the color you get. So I'm mixing in the black here, and we're going to be using this on the pants of the model. So I'm going to try and build up some separation between the tunic and the pants that the model's wearing. And with the French gray and the cool gray, those colors, they're not completely contrasting on the color wheel, but they're pretty close. And if you want to take the French gray up a little bit more, you probably could get a lot more contrast built up that way and bring some visual interest to the model. But for me, I'm trying to be a little bit more subtle with the French gray, and I think that overall, when everything's said and done, it turns out all right. But I can definitely see someone wanting to bring that up a little bit. And in addition, I know that the pants on this model, there's not a whole lot showing on them, so we're also going to be using we're going to go through with the leather belts and pull them more towards the French gray side. Now I think you could cheat the black a little bit, or the blackish brown a little bit, by just painting it your normal brown color and then washing it over with a black wash. You can definitely use washes when painting Night's Watch to kind of help pull your colors into a direction. And if you use inks like artist acrylic inks, like I think FW is a pretty popular brand, or just very available one, you can use the inks to kind of dust the model and pull the colors that you've painted down to that black color. You could really just paint them like a forest ranger if you want to, and then just pull them towards black with an ink. And then we're hitting the leather straps on the sword with French gray, and then I'm pretty fine with how that's turned out right now. So we're going to go into one of my more fun ways to paint gray or black, and that's with teals. So this kind of gives you like this more night style look. Like one of the things about painting and trying to understand what's going on in the model versus what would be happening in real life, because that's what we're trying to kind of simulate here, is the colors reflected in highlights are typically the colors that are around you when it comes to, these really dark or really bright colors. So if you're kind of, having the moonlight bounce off of you, you could have it kind of be more of a tealish, maybe a more like pale white or purple color for the highlight. So I'm doing things a little backwards here from what I had done previously, just to kind of show you the different ways that you can integrate this black together. So I went ahead and mixed black and Incubi Darkness from GW, and just kind of painted on the raised parts where I would expect to see the teal come through, like my highlighted parts. And I love painting the cloaks on Night's Watch. They're always so like foldy and billowy. They just look really cool and whimsical. So there's a lot of fun you can have with highlighting the teal here. And now that that's still wet, since I painted this relatively quick, I'm going through and just working in just straight Incubi Darkness, and that's going to this color in general does a lot of really interesting things. It's one of my favorite ones to work with. And the reason why is because you can kind of alter the way that it works um, in terms of coverage. So a lot of paints, when you dilute them too much, um, they just don't work. But with the Incubi Darkness, you can kind of dilute it pretty thin to where you can get this like sheen to go over it, or you can keep it pretty thick and it'll cover just about anything underneath it. But right now I'm taking Army Painter's Hydra Turquoise, which is a really fantastic replacement for Hawk Turquoise if you like the old GW line. I mixed the Incubi Darkness and Army Painter Turquoise together to just really hit some of these tips of the folds so I can get some highlights going on. And I think that this is subtle enough to where you can't really tell that, oh my god, it's teal. But now you can actually see that there's some difference between the colors that we're working with here and still call out that that teal is a different business. So now I'm moving on to the fur. And for the fur, I'm hitting it with the black first because I think I didn't prime this model the best. I was kind of running to the end of the primer in the airbrush when I was working on them. So some parts I've got to reestablish that black so I don't have like a weird gray wash color or washed out color underneath. Like some of the model's initial gray was still showing through. So now I'm taking the GW, I think this is charred brown, or not GW, it's Vallejo Game Color. And while the black is still wet, I'm kind of mashing in some of the charred brown, and this is getting me like a really rough and gritty, like wet blend going on. This is by no means how I would advise someone to go about wet blending, but a lot of times when I paint these models, it's all about getting them painted and ready to play quickly. So I'm just really mashing that in there. I'm going to leave this to dry for a little while and then come back to start highlighting the rest of the tips of the model or the tips of the fur. So this one I'm not dry brushing because I feel like I'm going to create too much contrast that way, and then remove a lot of the black that we've worked to integrate into this brown. The main goal for this is to try and make it look like this was some kind of brown fur, like a grizzly bear types, think of that color. And then it was doused in some kind of black dye. No matter how much you dye, well, I guess you could probably dye something enough to make it pitch black because that's why we have pitch black clothing, but I am not a clothing creation expert, so I don't know any better. But I imagine for this, they're not going to be spending a ton of time dyeing this clothing to make it black. So what we would be doing is just, hitting it once, and then some of the parts where the dye you would imagine would work more towards the inside because that's where it would pool up, because I imagine it has a cohesive relationship or quality to it. But I think I'm going down a weird rabbit hole here. So essentially what I really want to do is just make kind of the tips look brown as though the dye is kind of like washed away or wicked away from that area. So we still have some of that brown like color to it to show that there's some more variety on the model, but it's still in all essence a black color that's on the model, so we're not really losing that Night's Watch idea at all. So I think now I'm just going around and hitting not sure if it's, I think it's the belts that I'm hitting with some of that French gray. Yeah, it looks like I'm just hitting some French gray parts to reestablish some of those highlights. We also ended up doing some French gray on the boots in case I had missed that part. Pretty easy to miss while I'm trying to explain weird fur deals. So I'm going to let the model sit for a minute while I try and get the rest of the flesh tone out, because we do have a few bits on this model that aren't actually black. So I'm going with my standard, at least for late of standard, has been Tindalos Red as a base for the flesh tones. But instead of going with the Resurrectionist flesh, I'm mixing it in with Harvester flesh. So I've never been one of these like historically accurate or fluff accurate painters before, but with this game for some reason it just, I enjoy trying to match some of the book stuff, or I don't know. It's weird. It's definitely uncomfortable and strange for me. But with the Night's Watch, it's more of a conglomeration of lots of different types of people. So what I want to do is really vary skin tones on the models, because there's not going to be a whole lot of variance in the black clothing that I do. It's going to be very much this type of pattern. They'll have that tealish cloak and the gray or the cool gray tunic with the French gray pants and boots and stuff. So a lot of my variance is going to come on the hair color and skin tones. So with having the base be resurrectionist flesh, I'm kind of getting more of a pink flesh tone here instead of the deeper like peachy skin tone that I would get if I were using the resurrection flesh or harvester flesh. I can't remember which one this one is. It's the two of them, and I always confuse them. This one is harvester flesh, so resurrectionist flesh is the darker one. But now I've mixed the previous mix that we did for the base layer with a little bit of the harvester flesh, and you can kind of see already that this model's turning out to be pretty pasty and almost translucent like. So I didn't have an idea of where I wanted the skin tone to go or regional origin for this model to be. I was really just kind of playing around, so I'm also not extremely up on the fluff of or the books. I'm just I haven't read all of them or read the ones that I have read very diligently, so I'm really just gonna throw a super translucent pasty skin tone on this person. And then I think for the hair I'm gonna end up having something that's like a weird blondish silver. So I'm really just picking out the edges here, and you can see that I turned my brush to the point where it's like, with this brush particularly, I've been using it a lot to smooth out paint, so that means that I'm flattening it a lot. So what I'm finding myself doing now is using that flat point that I had as the point to hit some of these highlights with the fingers and the nose. And I did come back with the base tone there just to reestablish a shadow that I had kind of knocked out by getting a little rigorous with the highlights. So here this is more me just kind of screwing around. This is not typically how I would paint someone with a blonde hair color, but I kind of wanted to go for this, older person who has blonde hair. And I think that, not that I know many aged people who have blonde hair, but I kind of expect that they keep a little bit of that like blondish yellow color hanging around. Now, when I mix these colors, I touched the brush on the model's hair, and I was not expecting like highlighter yellow hair. So while I was mixing these two colors, the Uriel yellow from GW and what is it? It's the lightish blue-gray from Vallejo. I use it all the time, and I can't remember the name of it right now. As I'm rooting through all my paints. At any rate, I can't remember it. Maybe it's on the screen and you can read it better than I could, but I'm not super happy with how this looks right now, so I'm kind of painting ahead of the drying schedule, and I'm hoping to kind of mix in the bluish gray or the bluish white here to maybe knock out some of that weird yellow color. It kind of looks like uncooked ramen. So yeah, it looks like I did take a moment for this to dry up, and then now I'm going in to try and make that look a little bit more like whitish instead of weird yellow. And it's picking up for the most part. Again, I've got 4 units of Sworn Brothers to paint, so the black goes pretty quickly, but I kind of want to hit the hair real fast, so I'm not going through and doing like specific strands or anything. So now I'm taking just a straight white and hitting some of the high points of the hair. And you can see we've kind of got this more silvery like hair look. Maybe he is an old Valerian or something. I don't know. But now I'm going to come in and do the metals because that's really the last thing we've got on this model. And I didn't shake these paints up very well, as you can tell. But black metal from scale 7.5 is probably one of the best paintable metals that's out there, or just the scale series. I know that I use a lot of scale paints, and I know they're definitely not perfect for anything. I don't want to seem like I'm, really throwing that company around as like the end-all be-all of painting. But their metals, if there's one thing you take away from the channel in terms of what paints you would want to use, the metals are where it's at. They blend really easy. They go on nice and strong. And here I accidentally had mixed my heavy metal in with one of the previous colors that I was mixing, like a skin tone or something. So I had to wipe that off with my finger and come back in and do the highlight. I'm not getting really intense with the blends on the sword. I'm really just trying to get it done. And then we go through and hit a couple of the buckles with that metal color. And as I'm looking over the model, the paleness and pinkness of the skin tone is just not sitting well with me. So I think I'm going to go through here and do some correcting on some of that. But right now, there's a little bit of the cloak that's wrapped around their neck in the front. So I'm just going through and putting on some highlights on that to make it stand out a little bit and have it, tie together. So now I'm taking the black wash because this is one of the important things about doing these blends to get the subtlety of black to come through is I'm not trying to make it too stark in the contrast. So that French gray and the brown got a little bit ahead of me. And I'm using the black wash to kind of bring it back towards that black color. So I took some of the parts of the French gray that I kind of highlighted a little too much and just ran that over real quick to kind of bring it back to black. And then the also ever important black base rimming is going on too. So I can have that done and finished so they look nice when they're in their little slots. So now we've got Seraphim Sepia from GW, and this is where I'm going to kind of tinker with the hair a little bit. I am bringing it a little bit more towards that blonde color by doing this, but when I looked at the model once it was finished, there was just no definition, and it was really hard to kind of pick it out as a silvery white-haired model. Like they didn't look blonde previously. And that's how I go about painting black in a couple different ways. Now, you could skip the whole cheaty wet blending thing and just dry brush the models with these colors as long as you're just keeping it closer to black. You're not going from black to just that straight bluish gray. Then it's going to look kind of strange. You could pull it back with some black wash, but there are a lot of different strategies you can use to make this happen. And it doesn't necessarily need to be this weird blending style that I've shown you. So if you have any questions about how to do this or any questions in general, just post them in the comments below. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you do, you can click the notification button to be alerted whenever I post some new videos. And just remember to check out the Patreon if you're interested in it all. And if not, just keep watching these videos and that'll keep me happy too. So I look forward to making the next painting tutorial for you. Otherwise, I'll catch you around.